ta vel imot kandidater og kommitten. Reis opp.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, and welcome to this public defense of the thesis entitled As Agent and Environment, a Biosemiotic Understanding of the Moving Body Within Ecology and Technology from Cases in Sport. Today's candidate, Margrethe Voll Storaas, completed her thesis in March 2025. Based on a proposal from the Department of Sport and Social Sciences, the Committee for Research Education has appointed the following committee to judge the thesis and other requirements for the award. Professor Ørnulf Seipel, Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, Chairperson. Professor Morten Tønnesen, University of Stavanger, First Opponent. Professor Katinka Evers, Uppsala University, second opponent. The committee has concluded that the thesis meets the standard worthy of a public defense for the award of Doctor of Philosophy, PhD in Sports Science. Earlier today, the candidate has given a trial lecture with the following title: The Ecology of the Non-Human Body in the Anthropocene, Comparing the Human and Non-Human Body. The trial lecture has been found satisfactory by the examination committee. I would now like to ask the candidate to introduce her doctoral research in the form of a short lecture, and the opposing members of the examination committee to engage the candidate in the defense of the work. Should members of the audience wish to ask questions relating to the research, I ask you to bring these in written form to the attention of the chairperson in the break prior to the second opponent. I now ask the candidate to take her place at the lectern.
There we are. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I will now give a brief rundown of my work spanning 4 papers. And as much as it may be a far-fetched overreach of a research fellow realizing that I am at the peak of my position as such, ever so temporarily, I do wish to claim this. The tension between ecology and technology, a human-made situation happening upon the finely tuned state that is the ecologically given. That is the macro-developmental event most defining of our time. You may disagree. But it is not a given how that event gets to define us. After all, definitions is part of what humans do best. My work with definitions and their theories begins where technologization is currently modifying the environments of my chosen case, the moving body. I have identified 3 pressure points that we have begun speaking of an entirely new sphere out of human-made mass. New initiatives making it ever more available to conduct biotechnological body modification of healthy individuals, an important premise in my work, and what I identified to begin with, an ongoing reconstruction of words that we use for the body in sport that could possibly be a barrier for or facilitate the other processes of technologization. I wish to mention a cyclical element to my work here, because when I started out, I didn't think of the third level here, the linguistic environment to the agent, as something also that had the same tension of ecology and technology in it. But I soon came to that realization as part of my finding. To begin, I wish to give an ecological, thus holistic, what is holistic? Well, where you see the whole of something. Totalitarian, but not in that sense. A holistic account of the moving body that responds directly to these observed pressures of technologization. And I began out with asking the research question, how may we understand the moving body ecologically in technologized environments? Again, respecting this hierarchization of a state, the ecological, and the technologization as a situation happening upon. Biosemiotics has been my ecological pre-technology perspective, where you look through the lens of semiosis, sign interpretation, adaptation, and making. I will go through what a sign is later in the presentation. Hybridity characterizes this framework, which is where you see the object of study, where it is alive, as all in one, if you will, as both the natural, social, and cultural. That is at least how we separate today. My work is descriptive in nature, not normative, but especially given that hierarchy that I mentioned between an ecologically given state and the technological situation happening upon, there is normativity here at work. And I welcome a debate. We'll probably discuss many aspects. Further operationalizations that I've done, sport has been considered the suitable sui generis context for studying the moving body. Here I exclude chess and esports because it is sedentary. Through my definition of movement, the reason for this narrowing down was also to ensure that I could use sport theoretically as best that I could, utilize the fact that here we do not sit in front of a computer typically. So my work would then be generalized. If it is generalizable, it could be so generalized beyond with that situation, sitting in front of a table. Also, I wish to mention that while I have only departed from physically able bodies, I have not gone into a variation there, then from a biosemiotic perspective, you are very much able, if you are alive, and if you are able at all to participate in sport, you are definitely, I dare I say, you are barely disabled, because there is semiosis going on internally and in that relation between you and the environment. However, disability studies would definitely have made me able to add more to the body theory that I generate within biosemiotics. That I believe and encourage further studies in. This is the richest slide you'll see. And I'm not going to read through all the sub-questions. Just a brief note on methodology. I have applied biosemiotic theory deductively in the first paper, so without any further configurations of that theory. I here have a comparative study, which you'll find in almost all papers except the fourth. There is no comparison there. But in all, there is concept generation and, to some degree, theory synthesis. The three next papers, they depart from an argument that I take issue with. Is doping or performance-enhancing substances at all enhancement? What would that require? And paper 3, where I look to the linguistic environment to the agent here, the moving body. I ask, is inclusive language as we know it today best described under that headline? I disagree. In paper 4, I go on a micro level from the macro in paper 3 in inclusive language, and I look to just the sentence, trans women are women. What could be said to be going on here from a biosemiotic perspective? So paper 1, why do birds have wings? And that biosemiotic argument for the primacy of naturogenic sporting sites, co-authored with Professor Lulan and published in the Journal of the Philosophy of Sport. As for findings, now I wanted to compensate a bit for having refused quite vehemently to use any kind of large language model or ChatGPT in my work by adding some AI-generated images. That aspect I do love about it, I do. Findings here, briefly, so it's a conditioned normative statement. I have not done a normative study. If we want to continue to have the ability to play, as today, to imagine a game, etc., we should surround ourselves with the nature-made external environment. We argued, Lula and I, that this deliberate choice of moving our movement outdoors rather than in indoors, gym studies, etc., gym studios, this is what we need to do in order to preserve the animal ludens, so a biosemiotic configuration of Homo ludens, which is the first work in the history of sport philosophy that would focus on play rather than the game. And here, in the initial discussion of the Homo ludens, the playing human, then biology became a contrast to what we were studying. Let's look at the cultural aspect, meaning-making aspect of it. But in our work, we consider meaning to be biologically derived. The human-made indoors locks us in an anthroposemiotic loop, even when we try to imitate the biology and the ecology on the outside through, for instance, a treadmill mountain, or mountain treadmill would be the correct idea, where we have an indoor treadmill so big it looks like a mountain. But after some time, we thought that the jogger, the mover, the person working out would realize that he was being fed a humanly selected set of signs. We would know that the mountain is only as tall as we have made it, and the humidity only what we have decided it to be, and even the songs of birds would go in a loop, would it not? Likely. So we recommend not moving as much indoors. I wanted to mention that this thought experiment alluded me to the possibility that metasemiosis, which would be where we are conscious of the origin of the signscape around us, can sort of save us. This is the birth of that idea. Second paper, replacement, not enhancement, outperforming doping autonomy by the semiotic body as an autopoietic performance system. It's a long title, and I've been told as much from through the peer review, which was a fantastic and wonderful experience. I was rejected the second time, which is part of the game, and I'm in the process of a second submission of that. It is a novel framework, biosemiotics, within sport philosophy. And it is important that I spend time on explaining it, which I, including, did not do that. There, a bit more text again. The important premise here for my second paper, where I generate a biosemiotic model of a type of autonomy that is holistic. It goes from the body that moves all the way up to the intentional level by us moving over time, by us deciding to work out on Tuesday, and then we get to rest. If we have worked out very good, then we will have engaged super compensation. That is natural self-enhancement, is it not? So I'm trying to take back enhancement as a term in our self-understanding. In this case, then, if you continue with that dedicated and intentional way of moving, causing an interplay between different process states, as I came to call it, the performance process being versus the restitution process being. So using here a biosemiotic term called semiotic anatomy for the moving body, but configuring that towards the case of sport. So in biosemiotics, there is a general idea of the semiotic anatomy, but it has not been given a specified set of types therein. So I'm hoping to contribute with cross-fertilization through my second paper, arguing that ecological top elite performances are caused by what I call the autopoietic performance system. This would be the higher order of a whole caused by the moving body over time, from Tuesday to Thursday to next Monday, etc. Whenever we are able then to reproduce the performance process being or process state after we have caused a restitution process state, these instances would be what constitutes the autopoietic system on a metaphysical level. So you cannot hold that, the APS. But we can conceive of it, and I suggest there could be a beneficial, this could be a beneficial conception. Because then, doping is completely disallowed, regardless of whether it is safe or not. External substances would hinder our ability to reproduce the process state when we use performance replacing substances, as I would move to call them. Because doping substances would replace the performance, it causes an external origin of that performance. There are other holistic, so integrated types of frameworks being used in sports sciences. The most novel that I have come across is Network Physiology of Exercise, which is well due credit, but this is still a framework within physiology strictly. I cannot find intention being built into the model itself. I believe I do propose that. So if we want to continue our holistically already self-enhancing system of being what I call, and I'm sorry to add that because it's not in my thesis, I forgot to take it out, but of what I have come to think of as an embodied body, rather than being embodied minds. Then again, conditional argument, then we should reject initiatives such as the enhanced games that legalizes and one could say culturally normalizes doping. To my last papers, last 10 minutes, these two I will deal with in conjunction because they are very much interwoven. Originally, this was one paper, as was commented on by the committee, but I had issues finding good journals to publish in because here were two levels of analysis. The macro level, where I'm doing more of a sweep, trying to, or arguing for the presence of a pattern across several instances, which we will turn to. And then I also moved along a much more micro level of analysis through semiotic analysis, just as taking one example, trans women are women in this case, and seeing what is going on there. All right. From a biosemiotic perspective, words are quite special. They do constitute parts of our linguistic environment, which I argue is like water to fish. We cannot live without it, and we are intimately, existentially related to it, not just functionally. In academia, we do work with words more through their function, do we not? We argue for why we should use this and not that. That is a pragmatist, often, analysis we're doing. But from a biosemiotic view, there could be more to it than this sort of technical assessment, technical use, even of words we study. To use a word without thinking is what we call a generalized anthroposemiosis. So we just go about our daily lives. Do you want a coffee? Yes, sure. No, I would like a tea, if you change your mind quickly. But then if coffee and tea means different things for the two that speaks, they will have a problem communicatively. Yes, but also there's a reason for why they say the sound coffee or the sound tea. To redefine a word, to take a step back and say, you know what, I think the word coffee, it has some sort of power structure embedded in it. I'm not sure if I'm so okay with that. I want to use a different word because of the history to this. Well, that's fantastic and very natural for humans to do. It is embedded in how we deal with science. However, one should be aware what is then ongoing. That here we are talking about a different level of semiosis, of sign interpretation, from which is also the case, I believe, in these three cases. E-sport is sport, redefines sport, because of the properties in the object that we use the sound e-sport to refer to. We'll get to this. Trans women are women does the same to the sound, to the word women. Women can no longer be what they used to be if trans women are also women, when trans women is a term, a sound we use to refer to people with a male sex. And then we have the idea of enhanced identity. Has anyone seen that? I was just curious. Heard of it before? No, it's interesting because Enhanced Games took it down from their websites. It was on there on one page called Inclusive Language up until August 2024. The slow person, I didn't get to archive it until it was down. But it's a very interesting added initiative to the Enhanced Games. Perhaps to culturally also give a little bit of risk or aid to the acceptance, cultural acceptance of using performance replacing substances. So what is the sign? I'm going to be a bit quick about this. I've used Charles Sanders Peirce. He is the seminal character. He was not just a semiotician, but he is the one who has been given us, I was supposed to hurry and then I do not hurry. He has given us the structure of a sign, which has been much in use. He defines a sign as that which stands to somebody for something in some respect or capacity. So the point is that there is a longer process here. We're not just seeing a pen, we're making a sound, a new name for what I'm holding right now. And if I decide to change what the sound pen refers to, suddenly this is a pen, then that is signs in action and my metasemiosis in action as well. So there's a lot of power to dealing with signs and perhaps changing them. If we look to the second definition, Peirce gives several, where the object determines an effect upon the person, an effect called its interpretant. That interpretant is what I believe Sally Haslinger, one from my own field of philosophy, yes, but also within a newly popularized headline of conceptual engineering, put forward by Helmut Kapal in 2018. So we are right at it right now, the front line of new innovations within theoretical research. And when there's a lot of power to the effect upon a person, the mental representation of the object that we have a sound for, a name for, I argue, then how one deals with the relation between name and object becomes a matter of ethics. Now, again, I do not do that normative assessment here, but it is very much implied in my work. From a biosemiotic perspective, it could be problematic to have this view, where I'm not going to read the whole quote, but I've highlighted the words, the rhetoric, that would give way to an idea that words are simply tools. And they have a function, and that is why we have them. Rather than capture what we mean, this is my word, sorry, our scholarly priority may well be, and here comes Haslinger, how we might usefully revise what we mean for certain theoretical and political purposes. From my view, as a young scholar within philosophy, we are here looking at a politicized version of philosophy. And it disheartens me greatly. Maybe I'm being melodramatic due to my youth. That could well be. But if you then concretize the political purposes as a specific paradigm, for instance, what Haslinger does, the social justice paradigm, we are looking at a method within academia that takes as its validity criteria, its criteria for success, whether or not you have included a given group that is considered by the philosopher to be marginalized, to be a minority, that one should demarginalize. I have to move on to my findings, but it was quite a great experience for me to realize that ameliorative analysis has been with us for so long. Right, this is what I mentioned. In this case, then, one would take the sign, instead of pen, one would say woman, but instead of referring to the old object that has given meaning to the word woman, one re-engineers the existing and says, no, let's have a new object. Why? Because that would include male people who wish to be considered as women. I argue that there's a red line here between exchanging an object that especially comes from the mind-independent sphere with one that comes from the mind-dependent one. Gender identity is a mental construct. There's nothing wrong with having that construct. That's not what we're dealing with here. It is a great difference between that as an object in the sign that is already very much in use. In all societies, all across the world, there is a word for being an adult human female. In sport, e-sport is sport, first case, I look to the substitution, similarly, between organized whole body movement and physical exertion. If you were an athlete, that was part of the deal. With sedentary game playing and mental exertion, again, can be perfectly meaningful and something that we would like to build a culture around, not a type of movement culture. There is movement in the fingers, and there's a lot of team community. There's many game and play and sport values to be found. But if this property that was the old object, if that is what has been considered sport, and we are dealing with what? We are dealing with what I believe to be a substitutionary type of language. Now, I'm afraid time is about to run past me, so I will give quickly another main aspect of my findings. What I recently described is what I call vicarious semiotic engineering. My findings is therefore that inclusive language is not a good headline because it does not adequately address what is actually going on, the impetus for these changes, these radical redefinitions of words already in use. As if they were just tools, and just tools for someone else to decide how to use. Are they not everyone's, in that case, in any case? I therefore suggest vicarious language, or language political language, or engineered language. Also, one of my main findings is that I have here come to the point where I consider words themselves, signs, that is, of the type that is called symbols, to be ecology and technology, if we make them into it. This is based on my idea, my new concept of grown meaning, where the relation between the representamen object, that will be the sound or the letter on a page, and the object you refer to. From that relation grows, you can imagine, as I do at least, a tree. Over time, every time we have engaged with and ourselves put into the world an expression of being an adult female human body, we have been presenting ourselves through that name. We've had a name which has been woman or women. The relation has an effect. Remember, it determines an effect upon the person. The mental image, the mental representation. Represent from Eduardo Kuhn would be to bring back the present we have already been through. Representations. So we bring the past into our present and possibly into the future. Signs have an amazing effect on meaning. It is meaning making, but on how we temporarily cause a continuity. So I feel a community, for instance, with previous women through that word. Could that not be a possibility? So how do sport organizations wish to relate to this process of possible technologization of language itself that we use for the moving body? Do we wish to, in our community, to advance technologization or preservation of the cultural infrastructure for interpreting the moving body? I will finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margrethe, for presenting your work. I now invite Morten Tønnesen to start the discussion.
Okay, I need some help with getting this presentation on. Thank you. Yep. So, at some point soon, I'll get to my questions and the dialogue with you, Margrethe, but I'll first share some of the evaluation of the committee, the assessment committee, to inform everybody of how we have evaluated this written work, the thesis. And I also would like to introduce myself by indicating that I assume I've been invited to be here as an opponent because I have been working in my research with biosemiotics and because I am a philosopher with a job, and not because of my athletic capacities, even though I do work out in a dojo. And I'd also like to mention, before getting started, that Katinka and I have agreed who addresses what, and especially concerning the articles, I'm addressing the two first ones, number 1 and 2, and Katinka will address themes in the 2 last articles. And I'll also raise some more general questions based on your introduction or kappe to your thesis work. But first, excerpts from the assessment report. And this is not new to you, Margrethe, but it is new to most people in the audience. So with Ernulf and Katinka, we have made the following evaluation of the written thesis. So first, concerning the thesis topic and main objective, we find the research topic and objective to be theoretically very interesting from perspectives encompassing a variety of academic disciplines. The research is also timely. Storaas succeeds in contributing in novel ways to several fields of study and topical areas: philosophy of the body, sports sciences, and biosemiotics. Among new coinages, the new term grown meaning, introduced in the 4th paper, appears to be particularly valuable and of broad relevance in a semiotic setting. About methodology, this is part of our evaluation. Storaas makes skilled use of a combination of philosophical and biosemiotic perspectives on sport and on the human body in general. For the purposes of the study, the methodology of evidence-based and reality-connected linguistic and conceptual abstract analysis, as in the analytical philosophical tradition, appears well suited, as it encompasses both the physical and the linguistic in a meaning-building ecological framework. Moving on now to theoretical framework, we conclude the theoretical framework is well presented, clearly described, and firmly anchored in the relevant literature. It corresponds well to the research objectives. It is somewhat paradoxical that Storaas, despite stressing the advantages and perhaps necessity of applying a nature-oriented, ecological, holistic perspective, chooses to limit her treatment of the body to the human body, which ironically implies an anthropocentric perspective, or a focus on humans only. But while this might have been problematic if the thesis was primarily about biosemiotic issues generally, or human ecology generally, it does not constitute a considerable problem, given that this thesis is placed within sports sciences and related areas. In the context of sports sciences and body philosophy, rather than contributing to more anthropocentrism, she brings in more ecological and nature-oriented perspectives on the moving human body, drawing on empirically and theoretically informed views originating from biology and semiotics. So that's some of the most important assessments from our report. And I'll say something briefly about the two first articles as well, and what we say in summary, before finally getting to the dialogue with you. So, about the first article. The article provides a convincing argument and new perspectives on sporting sites, while also relating the issue of sporting sites to larger issues in current human ecology and related to the ongoing environmental crisis. The suggestions for how sustainability and human agency should be understood in the context of sporting sites appears to be fruitful and based on sound reasoning. Exactly how heterogenic and anthropogenic sport sites should be distinguished from each other is a challenge which is handled in an acceptable way in the article, although there seems to be room for disagreement about where the line between the two should be drawn. And finally, about the second article, addressing doping issues. The article provides a somewhat intricate, but in the end sophisticated and convincing case against doping on the backdrop of biosemiotic theory. The key message in our reading is that doping threatens the genuine, natural bodily autonomy of athletes in ways that endangers age-old ideals concerning fair competition in sports. A biosemiotic perspective may, as Storaas demonstrates in the article, improve our understanding of the workings of human agency and autonomy in sports in relation to the human body. And we note that it also demonstrates the pertinence of metaphysical and ontological perspectives in sports sciences, or confirms the relevance of philosophy in this context. Now the summary and conclusion, and here I have left out much of our evaluation text, but focused on the evaluation. But this sums it up. The thesis is theoretically sound, highly original throughout, and in a positive sense complex, with a fruitful combination of philosophy, biosemiotics, that is, semiotics informed by biological theory, and sports sciences, among other fields of study. And lastly, the committee has identified certain limitations, for instance, related to the human-centered perspective on the body and the lack of political analysis in the context of gender and sex. But these choices are well justified given the scope, design, and focus of the thesis as a whole. Having a consistently ontological perspective throughout the thesis works well overall, and ontological means basically relating to reality or what exists. The language of the thesis is occasionally slightly convoluted, but for the most part, the candidate communicates clearly and intelligibly. So that's just to set the scene for how we have assessed this work in the assessment committee. And now my first question to you, Margrethe, is what your assessment is of the relevance of biosemiotics generally, and why do you think biosemiotics is a fitting theoretical perspective to apply to sports studies?
Thank you very much. You can, yes. Thank you so much, Professor Tennison. This is a good place to start, is it not? Why did I choose biosemiotics? Originally, I had gone for metaphysics of the body's boundaries. I got infatuated with that until a supervisor got me on a path that I believe proved much more fruitful in the end. This is because biosemiotics enables me as a researcher to do that study across the span of human being and other non-human being, from the physical to the much more dynamic, perhaps also more convoluted phenomenon that is language, that is a delay in how we react to the world. Well, it allowed me to study the whole scope. And then from there, there's the philosophy within biosemiotics is very rich and is very novel, and you feel quite motivated. I encourage my colleagues to give it a go, because if you start from the position that everything is science and everything is semiosis, sweeping claims, I know, but we have to start from somewhere. And when you do that, you realize that what you're doing right now, the study you're doing, research, analysis, reflection, all these fancy words we have, using rationality and reason, are departing from the structure. It makes sense to me, at least, the premise, the structure, that is the triangle put forward by Peirce. Peirce complicates the picture much more. He adds interpretants and objects, by all means. But if we start there, you realize that you are also part of the process you're studying, much more so than in constructivist theories, which of course are already the case in human sciences, where you consider your work to add to existing structures of meaning, and the concepts you make to be constructions. So to what degree are you constructed and your idea of yourself? Judith Butler has a very interesting, I think, take on that in 1988 on performativity and its gendered composition. But back to biosemiotics, I think biosemiotics gets the upper hand even from constructionism, because it is not just the words that we make that makes our understanding of things. It is the very orientation towards what is on a much more basic, and here then, if so, biological level. So I think that I got to emerge from the beginning of choosing only biosemiotics. I got to emerge as this animal, this linguistic type of body, seeing myself in that moment much more so fully. And suddenly, the whole demarcation we're doing in academia, in which I'm situated when doing that also becomes quite obsolete. Why am I not a natural scientist, I ask you? Because am I not studying nature too?
Sure.
Yes, that's the first question.
Thank you. I'll just briefly remark that I absolutely see your point, that biosemiotics is one of the few fields of study that can relate to anything from language and culture to biology within one coherent framework. So while there might be other starting points you could have taken, I agree that this is a fitting one. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm biased since I'm doing biosemiotics myself. But given that choice of applying a biosemiotic perspective, I also want you to say and explain why you chose to apply an anthropocentric perspective. So if you use a theory that applies to all life, why then focus on only the human body?
Because I am conducting my study at the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, and I do believe in the pragmatist ideal to make the work that we do as theoreticians available and applicable in the lives of humans today. Of course, there is a very important consideration, given the reason that I at all have that opportunity, that academia exists. It didn't begin from that pragmatist point of view, and I did it. It began out from what should always infuse our work, which is the curiosity at base, finding out answers, at least tentative as such, for the sake of the answers themselves, not just for what they can be used as. However, I think there is something to be said about internal and external factors to research, as sociology of science does speak of. I know very little beyond that, but that has, I think, helped me to orient myself also on this question. Because I'm a student that has been taken into an institution, and my position has been funded for a reason and for a certain demographic. And if I cannot focus on the human body in sports studies, then I'm afraid I will fall short of those legitimate expectations that is being put on me. But there is a debate to be had with more people involved than I on that matter. In addition, though, there is an argument that is less pragmatic, which is that we should study whatever we do not understand for the sake of understanding, and we do not understand the moving body from a biosemiotic perspective, and I think I should isolate my objects of study enough so that I get to the depths available for me. Had I added other beings, while I very much welcome that, also from a movement and physical education point of view, perhaps, it's already being done in education studies now. There's an impetus towards ecologizing education studies. But I by all means acknowledge the value of such studies. But in this case, I wanted to isolate the human, and therefore I did.
Sure, I think that's a acceptable pragmatic answer.
Okay, thank you. It was very pragmatic.
It works in this context.
Yeah.
I want to dwell a little bit about what distinguishes human beings from those who are not, and ask you first, in your judgment, how does human agency, so the way that humans act with intentions and so on, differ from the agency of, for instance, animals? Because since I work with biosemiotics myself, it is implied from that biosemiotic perspective that it's not only human beings who have agency. So if you compare the human agency with the agency of other living beings, what makes us stand out, you think? Or you could point to similarities if you prefer, but how do you look at that?
No, I am glad that you pressed this question, because I cannot claim to belong to a line of biosemioticians upon the fortunate endowment of a PhD at the end of this, we'll see. But I cannot claim that if I don't equalize agency, semiotic agency, across different types of composition, types of umwelt. That would be pulling anthropocentrism into the field that I ask to be included in on the basis of merit. But I would say that human agency is unique in its ability to assess its own agency. And we haven't found this capability in other species.
So it relates to metasemiosis as one term you have used, that humans are capable of not only using science, but reflecting on how we make use of science, and maybe making decisions about how to change our use of science, at least in the case of language, right?
Yes, exactly. I do lean a lot on, analytically, the concept that I think is fantastic, put forward by Susanne Petrilli and Augusto Ponzio. John Dealey was part of the conception early on, which is metasemiosis. And that is the ability, as you mentioned, as you described, to be aware of the signs that we use for their vehicle function. You say it better than I do, but as signs, and to delay our immediate reaction to the signs we create and that we are surrounded with, that we do not create entirely. With this, semioethics was developed alongside the conception of metasemiosis, and I don't think that was a coincidence, because with the ability to assess how we deal with and how we react to our environing world and our own impact on it, such as is the case, most notably in our context here, working through towards an ecological understanding, the planetary crisis, then a responsibility could be said to follow, could it not? That is lies more so on the shoulders of the creatures that happen to have, I don't know how we got there, but we now have an ability to not just understand but take action that would, well, on what basis would we do that? I want to be careful with the ethics of the discussion, because it is not what I myself have been working with. But I do. That is one of the most important. That is the most important, actually, element of human agency, that in how it differs from non-human, in my view, which is the metasemiosis and ability for semioethics. It's a very novel field, but it has a lot of promise.
Yeah, and it's possible that this sounds Greek to many in the audience because you're not familiar with biosemiotics, but to me it makes good sense the way you phrase this, and in a way it's maybe a biosemiotic way of reframing some of the claims often made by philosophers about humans being self-conscious and so on, but with an emphasis on how we can consciously relate to our own sign use. Yeah. Okay. Not quite done with animals yet.
Good.
How do you think the human body differs from other bodies? If we say that if not any organism, then at least any animal has a body. And how does the human body stand out? This is something you, in a way, touched upon in the trial lecture earlier today, but I want to ask this question specifically. You said earlier today during the trial lecture that you think we should look at things acknowledging that we are bodies first, and that mind and agency and so on is something that derives from the body, right? And that would apply to both, to any kind of body, not just the human body. But what, if anything, is unique with the human body?
I think that the fact that we are so linguistic in our semiosis, in our way of dealing with the world, both internally and externally, I wonder if not, that has an effect on, a quite significant effect on our doings, because we have a very marked I. The self feels like it lies at the tip of our tongue all the time. I'm unable almost to act on an experience I have immediately in that non-linguistic mode, the immediate. I wonder if animals in whom we cannot find linguistic abilities such as ours, and there are, by all means, evidence of sign use on the symbolic mode, primates, for instance. But to the degree that we do it, maybe the animals have more of a non-arbitrary, way of experiencing. And I use arbitrary to refer to the arbitrariness of the symbol, where we have just made up the representamen, as I mentioned to you, which is the exterior of a sign, what you're being met with immediately, and then that representamen will take you to something else. So a sign is something that stands for something other than itself. And where you're taken to would be, the meaning of it, but if humans do not have that sort of arbitrarily put representamen-object relation, maybe they are not, maybe they're more accepting, I don't know, of the ongoings in the world. We differ very much so in this ability to control, and I think not just ability, but desire to control. We have a desire to modify things, it seems like to me. We're being driven from an internal impetus towards it. It's like we can't help it. You're all here. Everyone cuts their hair, don't we? And we try to control our perception. It seems very, very natural to use that term, which is much, it's vague, but instinctual. So perhaps different cognitive faculties in the minds of humans compared to the minds of animals may be understood through the arbitrariness of what type of sign we use the most, namely symbolic signs.
Right.
That is I'm just pondering, it's just very speculative. I don't know how to test for it either, so not that that's what I do, but.
So what you say resonates with a quite common perception about what it means that humans are capable of using symbols much more so than other species, because it's common in semiotic circles to regard symbolic sign use as arbitrary or conventional, in that we can just agree on what we mean by it and then it works in our context. So it's much more flexible than some other signs that are more strictly defined physiologically, for instance. That's right. I wonder if you forgot the body
Oh, yeah.
as you were
No, I
speaking,
didn't.
because you started talking about symbols, but I asked about the body.
Well, I wouldn't say that I did, because I discussed the mind, and I think that is the body, but on a different end of the continent of being a body.
Yeah.
I would say I do not believe anymore in metaphysics as for instance, as a realm that is both non-physical and existing beyond the mind. So for me, what I see would be all would be anchored in the body. Also, whatever minded abilities we have, the mind itself is a sign. What do I think of when I say it? I imagine that it lies somewhere else in the body, but I have no evidence of that. So I think I was talking about the body, but why did I not use the word? A minded body is new. It's a concept that I find fruitful. So I like to use, and I could have used that to make.
Right. Because, it makes sense given what you have written and presented, that you look at the body and the mind as a continuum, right? Which cannot really be studied separately from each other. But some would ask, if a human being has 2 arms and 2 legs, then, and if we have the same physiology on some points as an animal, are we similar, or are we completely different because our human minds make us different even in bodily terms?
Well, it would be, I can't speak of pragmatism at one point and then speak as if bodies are all the same when one has a fin and another can fly, and then we have 2 legs and we can have a public lecture. So I would, in order to ensure a little bit of reflective equilibrium here, where I kind of have a consecutive way of dealing with these questions, then by all means, there is a need to declare, there's a need to acknowledge the difference, the uniqueness of the body that we are ourselves. But if we consider, in my framework, that body would be the basis for everything we can do. So if we care about everything we can do and see that, so I'm thinking in the cognitive terms, the type of cognition we are able to do. If we consider that type of cognition so very special that it makes us more different perhaps than we are similar to other bodies,
right?
Then we should go back to the body being the basis for that, and the body is similar to other animal bodies. So we are different in the feature that the body that we are has in terms of cognition.
In terms of cognition, but in a way it seems like you focus on the cognitive capacities following from the human brain and how it differs from other brains because it affects how we relate to our own bodies.
Now I do depart in the comparison between human bodies and animals, so pre-linguistic bodies. Then I'm saying that yes, I acknowledge that here is a very unique, species-specific domain of reflective thinking, and of course it has such a. It is the reason why I'm here. It is the reason for how I direct everything I do, that I am Margrethe Voll Storaas, and here I am a research fellow. So I'm not saying that the bodies are the same. What I'm saying is that for its basis, for everything that comes after, it is the same. Well, it's the same type of no, it's not the same type of composition. Why do I call it a body? Well, because it is, I could define a body. But because we are sentient and feeling organisms made out of organic matter, process beings. And when that is the beginning, then I think the rest is very much interesting. What I'm trying to do is hierarchize a little bit. I'm trying to say that, yes, let's acknowledge the differences between species, by all means. But we don't have to go all the way into an anthropocentric view in that regard. If we acknowledge the basis for all that we differ along, the basis is not different. We are alive. We are living beings. Imagine that we are putting pigs in cages. They can interpret. They have social hierarchies. So if you start from that point, I think perhaps we will think a little bit less of our wonderful enactment upon our cognitive self-adoration. Yes, so that's the hierarchization I was trying to get at.
Let's move on to this question. Do you think that we can say that animals do sport?
Well, depends on how you define animals. Many would say that humans are a type of animals, but in this context, I'm assuming you refer to non-anthropos semiotic beings.
Yeah, and I think you can take the question in two different meanings. And one would be if we relate to sports that involve animals, like horse racing or dog racing, camel racing, pigeon racing, or some versions of fighting among animals, cockfighting, dogfighting, camel wrestling. Are the animals then, in these cases, doing sport, or is it just human beings arranging this, making it sport?
Yes, fantastic. I like that version of the questions. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Well, we would have to begin with what is sport, and the ability, if that is so with other creatures other than humans, to imagine a set of rules, to act on those rules, constitutive rules, regulatory rules, they wouldn't be able to do that, or auxiliary. So these different types of rules are important for sport to go about. Constitutive being the rules that make the game And what is a game? According to Bernard Suits, it would be the voluntary acceptance of unnecessary obstacles to reach a human-made goal, such as when there's barriers in the race, you have to jump over the barriers. Can the horse that is asked to jump over the barriers in a equestrian or horse race, can it view the object, the play object, if you will, in the terms that would make the horse do sport? That would have to entail that the horse does the act as a voluntary act? Does it voluntarily jump the barrier? Well, I don't know how to assess that, but I would imagine horse riders to have a very difficult time with always having to force the horse to do things it doesn't want to. So perhaps we can take voluntarity, acceptance. Maybe we can take that as one premise. But in any case, we're not going to get to the point where a horse understands the totality on an abstract level. The sport is something we have organized.
So they might be maybe doing sports but not understanding that it is sport. So it's sport only from a human perspective.
And suddenly I turn into metaphysician again, because then I would say that is not sports, unless the different criteria stand in a relation to each other. So, and just to throw in a couple of more nuances, because in some of these contexts, there's only two animals fighting, for instance. But in some sports, of course, there's collaboration between humans and animals, like in horse racing with, people on top of horses competing. And obviously, the human beings are competing, right? But there's interaction. And as for the question about whether the participation of the animals is intentional and voluntary, they are typically trained to take part with their human companions, right? But that might not change your view in any way. No, it would not be I'm afraid not. It would not be the voluntary participation for the sake of reaching a goal, a specific goal that the sport would give. In horse racing, you would have to jump over the barriers in as little time as possible, probably, and also given the aesthetic criteria, in in a satisfactory way. And the horse may then work by proxy. It could be participating in sport by proxy through in this case, the mind of the human. I do not see how we can have a concept of sport that would include, if you will, non-human ways of dealing with science around us. The horse would be, they would act upon the play objects exclusively from the relation with the rider, would it not? Maybe it will add, by all means, meaning to the different objects here. I'm thinking the barrier or the arena, the sand maybe that the horse senses the heat in the sand or other signals we do not necessarily pick up as easily. And that could, after time, could probably acquire sport-specific value. I've been working, it's only mentioned briefly at the end of the thesis, but I've been wanting to work with a paper that my supervisor I've been nagging him about for 2 years, on Spielwelt, which would be a sports-specific type of umwelt that only arises temporarily within the individual, that accepts and that has an idea of the game. The moment the whistle blows in a soccer game, that's when the Spielwelt starts, because suddenly the thing we call the ball acquires a completely new meaning. We talk about, from John Deely, different types of meaning endowment, so desirable, non-desirable, safe to ignore. And where the ball may have been completely safe to ignore, lying on the field before the game begins, it suddenly becomes very desirable. And my point here now is that maybe also the horse has this, semiotically speaking, this change in how it relates to different play objects. Outside of the arena, there could also be sand. Obviously, there's sand in the training arena, training hall. But the horse knows that because of the lack of other auxiliary perhaps elements, that it has been trained. It has not just been trained, it is an active participant in that meaning development, I think. So through its own experiences being in that arena, then it starts adding a new type of value. Maybe the barrier becomes more desirable since the whistle has blown in the arena for the horse. So I think this is interesting for me from a biosemiotic perspective. Perhaps one could give a little bit more pushback to a strictly metaphysical conception of sport, to say that if it is signs in making, then yes, animals do, if not make symbols, they don't have to in order to enter the Spielwelt as I've presented it. Because there's not much more than symbols at play in a game, in sports. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Now I want to ask you quite freely, but not too extensively, to explain what sport is in a biosemiotic perspective, in your biosemiotic perspective.
Thank you. That would be similar to my previous reply. It will build on that. In sport, we freely engage in a type of activity that we are physiologically able to do, but we do so while sort of modifying that possibility. There is only a certain movement technology, if you will, a type of movement that will allow you to reach the desired goals. So we start through sport to relate to a bodily, and here I would say in a holistic sense, bodily ability, so both, it's hard to discuss without using body and mind, again, the dualism, I mean, right there now, but our whole apparatus, existential apparatus, I mean, then we are able to engage that according to new ideals, new desires. For instance, community. We are able to change the way we move in order to fetch that ball as a goalkeeper, so that the team will not lose a point. And I think it's a beautiful thing to have that collectiveness, collectivity that sport allows for, because you cannot play a very few games that I know of, at least, requires only one person, and even then you would probably want not to be the only person in the world to do the game, you know, that there has been some other people. In any case, the pioneer that made the game happen. So we are seeing the animals on Earth, one type of animal, being as much the animal that we are, because we are fiction makers, we are symbol makers, but we are doing so together, collectively. Personally, I believe that to be a very fruitful, potent basis for doing other things collectively. I do believe sport can, from a biosemiotic perspective, can help us develop a collective, playful idea of sustainability, to do that collectively as well.
Thank you. So one of the things I got out of what you said is that we can regard sport as a particular form of human fiction, right? But that we do collectively.
Yes.
And you could frame that semiotically.
Yes,
Yep.
that was a better way to say it.
Now I move on to my last questions, which concerns Article 1 and Article 2. So I'm done with the more general questions. And now I will relate a bit more closely to what some of your main perspectives or findings in Article 1 and Article 2. So we start out with your article written along with Sigmund Låland, Why Do Birds Have Wings? A biosemiotic argument for the primacy of naturogenic sporting sites. And this is my first question. In this article, you argue that naturogenic sporting sites are preferable to secluded anthropogenic sporting sites, arguing that the latter might lead us into an anthroposemiotic loop and weaken our contact with nature. And when you write about an anthroposemiotic loop, the point you're making is that if it's if in a way there's only human-made scenery and human-made signs to relate to, we end up losing contact with reality somehow, as one way of simplifying it. And my question is, but what is nature? And what is natural? Isn't it natural for humans to be in a constant process of change? Because one of the arguments you draw on in this article is that we should stick to using natural environments or sporting sites because it connects with how we have evolved to behave and so on. So the question is really, is what is natural static? Isn't even what is natural as well as what is human always in a process of change? So how can we say that anything new, anything that is changed is insufficient in comparison with natural environments?
Yes, why is it not nature? What is going on the inside of gym studios? Nature at play, humans being nature, and...
Yeah, and I understand, of course, why you separate between outdoor and indoor environments. There's huge difference. So I get your general argument. And I also agree, personally, that it's not necessarily constructive to portray an indoor environment, an artificial human-made environment, as natural, because everything is natural.
Yeah.
Because if you call everything natural, then the term loses its meaning. You can't use it as a distinction. But still, it's challenging to draw the line a specific place and say, this is natural, and this is not.
Yes. No, that problem of delineation we find in many cases when working with human-made constructions and the impact we have. I encounter it already on the first page of my thesis, to delineate between spheres, as we call it, the hydrosphere and atmosphere, geosphere, etc. on one side, the ecospheres, and then the technosphere on another. When many of us have pacemakers, and we can build technology into our bodies. Are we then in the middle of spheres? What are we? And also buildings can be made out of wood. Why is that not necessarily a part of the lithosphere or biosphere? But I'm glad you touched upon the use of the term nature, and because I think that is as a good starting point. In order to have words that we can use to understand anything, they would have to have a use, and they would have to be. I think they have a use even if it's a conceptual delineation. That is my point. Even though we cannot find an equivalent marked point of separation in reality, then still to work with concepts, so human-made all the way, work with concepts that are clearly cut. That is what enables us to go out in the world and assess and analyze reality. So I would reject the premise of perhaps the question where it is a problem that we cannot draw this line very strictly. That is a problem for how we speak about it. I think if we have an idea of the nature-made, then we can discuss the human-made and the process with which we are now remaking our environments. I think that would be a useful set of tools to have. If we define nature and non-nature, to go the other way now, not just non-human all the time, but if we define nature as that which has its origin outside of human semiotic capacity, then I think we have arrived at a fruitful concept, because the origin will never change theoretically. So we can, by all means, we can then we can probably in the future we'll make trees, maybe we'll make some lower organisms. I don't know how far we've gotten to make humans, but we would then always be the originator, the origin. We can never escape that.
So just sticking with this distinction between indoor and outdoor sporting sites, of course, practically, well, at least most outdoor environments are also one way or another modified by human beings. So in how far can we call them natural, because it's an outdoor environment, when there's even so traces of human modification of that environment?
Yes, I guess we could, one way to differentiate the use of nature and non-nature is to look at the purpose of the environment, at least in the context of sport. That is one way of doing it, because we are moving. That is a general criterion for doing sports, at least in my definition of it. So to what degree is the environment for moving? To what degree has that been modified? When you're outdoors and you're skiing down a track, for instance, there will be forests that humans have not changed. They are where they have always been.
Which forest?
I don't know which forest exactly.
Because most forests are modified by human beings.
Oh, yeah. Oh, all right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I can't develop terminology to that idealized extent. And how could I test for it anyways? Maybe I believe the forest that I'm skiing next to is completely naturogenic, so made by nature, but then it turns out that we have sowed those seeds. But on the conceptual level still, to begin there, and then I'll move along to the real cases, then we could say that, we could differentiate that the environment around the mover, in the case that the environment has been changed, but not in any way that changes the subsequent movement, then you're dealing with a less anthropocentric, anthroposemiotic environment for moving. You could go in that direction.
Right, so that would also frame human modification of an environment as a continuum rather than yes or no.
Yes, yes, but I would uphold that I think it's very important actually that we keep the baseline, the conceptual baseline of separating between the naturogenic, which I think is better than just saying nature, and the human or anthropogenic, human-made. That origin is very important in terms of what it may allow us to do or not. Yeah. maybe I could conclude. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, one final question about Article 1. Because you also address in this article issues of environmental sustainability in relation to sports. And one of the arguments you use is that there's a sustainability argument for using sporting sites you have rather than necessarily building new, expensive, fancy ones. In how far do you think sports sciences are responsible for environmental sustainability, and do you think this is currently taken seriously enough in sports sciences?
I do not feel competent actually to reply extensively on this. You'll probably get, for once, a short answer, because I have not studied empirically the extent to which sports participates in building down land areas and wilderness. And also there's an ethical question of how bad, if you will, is it to modify a land area that has already been modified. And as you mentioned, there is very few areas now that is completely naturogenic in all aspects, not just where I tried to separate out movement-related aspects earlier. In 1917, 75% of the Earth was covered by areas, so circle areas, with a 10,000 kilometer radius that was completely untouched. So if you had I'm not sure what it's called in English, not the passer, but the mathematical device. Yeah, you could spin it around. If you took that on a map of the world, you could use that, and you had a radius of 10,000 kilometers relatively to the map. You could cover 75% of the map. Today, 100 years later, it is 23%. That is untouched by humans. So, by all means, sports sciences as well are part of that, that picture and that remapping of the Earth. So we should consider ourselves an active participant, and to the degree that praxis is only as good as our theory, then also theoreticians and scholars like myself should feel like active participants, even though we are not the ones driving the truck that is cutting down trees. I'm not the most practical. Don't know how they do that, but deforestation, yeah. Is anyone taking seriously the responsibility one may put on humans as a collective? I would say no. We wouldn't have been in the situation if we took it as seriously as it should. We are dealing with a problem of an existential magnitude. Yeah, and even whether you're anthropocentric or not, that doesn't really matter. Everyone is now affected by that situation. Sport itself, I'm again, I can't get very concrete about it, but I do wish to make a point on the fact that sport is a playful arena. It's an arena where we get to have a lot of meaningful and joyful experiences. But it has embedded in it this sort of escapism, many would say, where you get to forget the world out there. You get to adhere to relate to your surroundings in a fictitious way. Suddenly you're a team player in a game, and it's a tournament, and it's very big. But you're flying to the tournament. And the Olympic Stadium has been built on land that was, much more preserved earlier, if not completely. So perhaps there is something to be said about an extension of play itself, of realizing meaning, of allowing meaning in one's life. Yes, we have developed a community around the game that's something in isolation. We can escape to it, but wouldn't it be more meaningful if, knowing when you're passing that ball, that you're also not passing it on the grave of the planet?
Right, thank you. That leaves only Article 2 in my part of this opposition. Replacement, not enhancement, outperforming doping autonomy by the semiotic body as an autopoietic performance system. So here I've prepared 3 final questions. And let's start out here. So you develop an anti-doping argument drawing on an understanding of the semiotic body as an autopoietic performance system. Do you think there's a sharp boundary between natural and unnatural bodily functioning in this regard, so that doping can simply be dismissed as unnatural?
I would be careful with using the term unnatural. I'm suddenly unsure if I use it at all in my thesis. I hope that I've tried to avoid it because of its very ambiguous meaning. There are 11 different ways to use the word nature, according to an encyclopedic author that I cite in my thesis. But if I think there's a sharp boundary between bodily functioning in the regard of being an autopoietic performance system, it is not the choice of modifying one's ability itself, I think, would be best described as natural, because this is metasemiosis in action. And I've considered that as a species-specific for humans, meaning it is perhaps best described as the most natural thing to do, to develop the opportunity to change the access you have to an experience. I want to experience what it's like to run this, to run 400 meters, a couple of milliseconds shorter than before, and to assess the possible means to reach that goal. And I would say this is as human as it gets. So again, I would argue against the delineation by using the word natural and unnatural. Instead, it is the naturogenic. Again, I must stress the origin of performance. It cannot be said to be what it once was if you use external substances to reach it. And then, of course, the ethical discussion that would need to be had, in the case my paper was to be taken as a basis, then that would be, but why is naturogenic so important? What's the value of that? I like the origin. I like humans as the origin. I have no issue with that. In fact, as a transhumanist would say, which is the school where one considers the human constitution to be like a tabula rasa, a clean slate by which to paint our visions on and then take our human being to the next evolutionary step, which is kind of my nemesis, theoretically, philosophically. But the transhumanist then would probably say that I value the anthropogenic, the human origin, much more than whatever ecology has made. Look at the limitations of the human body that nature, as ecology, as the origin of life forms, has caused. Why not surpass this? No, there's not a sharp boundary. We are dealing with a continuum all across the board here, but where I believe humans are placed somewhere in the middle of the continuum, and that's what's exciting. Due to metasemiosis.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to build on this for my next question as well. So I hear that you don't want to use the term unnatural, but you do make some references, if I'm correct, to the natural positively without making that distinction, right? And what is natural in a way, but also it's good that you bring in the metasemiotic capacities of humans, which means that we can purposefully try to work with our behavior to, for instance, maximize athletic performance, right?
And that is why I at all develop the autopoietic performance system. It's to give a new conception for the metasemiotic agent here, the athlete, to make an informed decision. Information here being not just in a technical, hierarchized sense where you can empirically test for something through cause and effect, but understanding. Where information is understanding, then you have a plethora of opportunities to understand yourself and your decisions. So to have well-informed athletes would mean to have all conceptions available for making the decisions we would like. And today I think there is too little theoretical work being done on what you lose out on also on a metaphysical level. Metaphysics is a very good way to understand ourselves. You get to deal with totalities of our own making, so a framework that you can place your decisions and your being into the autopoietic performance system is metaphysical, yes, but it's a new tale, it's a new story that could open up for a meaning that today has not very fertile grounds to grow from. So just also in the case of autonomy, to ensure that an athlete or another comparably active person has the full access to making informed decisions, then they should not just have the tale of the transhumanists, that now we are remaking our species and taking us into the next evolutionary step, but maybe there is something fantastic and existing on a larger level than just the physical in the instantaneous moment going on when you work out the way that you do. You move without external substance help.
Right. Let's stick with external substances as a keyword, because that's relevant for doping, but also, for instance, for eating. We need food. We need external substances of some kinds to live, right? Including food. And in the modern world, we also take quite a bit of medications, which is also a kind of external substances. And where can you draw the line? Now, building on your anti-doping argument, so this relates to what I tried to introduce now. You claim that safe doping is, plainly speaking, replacement, not enhancement, since its use terminates and replaces the autopoietic performance system of the athlete's body rather than enhancing it. Yes. And I think there might be much to that argument, but this is one of the challenges your position raises. If safe doping is unacceptable from this perspective, then what about other interventions into normal body functioning, some of them involving other kinds of external substances, including food, medications? And what about surgery? What about prosthetic implants that replace missing body parts? The latter part of the questions might be, mostly related to Paralympics and the like, right? Where you draw the line for what is normal sports and parasports. But even forgetting that, where do you draw the line when it comes to food, medications, surgery? How much can we take in before you would say it disturbs or terminates what you call the autopoietic performance system?
Yes, thank you very much. This is a point I briefly touched upon. I could have elaborated it in my second paper. But the way that I separate between what you rightfully describe also as external substances, so I separate between the external that are permissible and those I think are not, at least if you put down preservation of the autopoietic performance system. That is the time it takes for the external substance to change capacity for performance. So if, let's say, having a certain energy level is a performance in the body that is outside of doping, outside of sports, and so the case of doping, just in general, then even food that we eat, as I mentioned in the paper, does have the ability to change our system for reacting the next time we use or consume external substances. Food can change our microbiota, our gut biota, or flora, bacterial flora. And it can also change, I read, receptors. I'm not sure about this. We are at the very boundary of my expertise, if I have one, but competency. But I've heard that food can also change the number of receptors for certain hormones, I'm assuming. So here the external substances are affecting, by all means, the system. One, the substances, but that's where there's a line again, do not originate from the human semiotic realm. So it is not anthropogenic. Let's begin there. The food that we eat. However, we have come to a point today where there's a lot of food that is ultra-processed, for instance. There's a big debate about that now. And I do think that ultra-processed food on the reservation that we would have to work with the definition of it. But the most processed food that we have today would possibly be considered as a type of human technology, so human-made. Yep. And maybe my APS model could be used, yes, to grant to deal with a larger scale of impact from the type of food that we today eat. And that is one thing. I have not looked into it, but I would look to a woman have to fulfill the criteria of ending the ability for the body to reproduce in its ability to react to the next instance of stress. It is the baseline that what is called semiotic anatomy. It is that baseline that is being affected immediately during doping. Whilst food does so in any case, leaving food technology as I propose aside, food in any case, when it enhances or increases receptors, will have the same effect but very, very slowly. So you will have the ability, the next time you eat food, to address food.
Yeah, but I think also one of the futures of some kinds of ultra-processed foods is that it has a really rapid effect. And sometimes, you feel full at once, and then you're hungry again an hour after. So if it has a quick effect, that would reflect some of the futures of doping as well, wouldn't it?
Well, the APS has been tailored to one variable, performance. That will be the output of a physiological capability. Yeah. What would be the output that food, in this case, what you bring up, that has a rapid effect on the body, what output does it affect? Again, the performance of being energized? Did you mean that to be hungry could be a performance, that it affects hunger?
No, well, I'm no expert on this, but I assume whether you are full or hungry, depending on the sporting situation, affects your performance, right? And
yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, and there might be regulations about what you can eat and not eat before a competition as well that I'm not familiar with. So there might be already something established here, but I'm raising it, of course, more as a principal question in relation to your anti-doping argument, and whether that would also lead to other kinds of boundaries for what you regard as acceptable and not from this perspective of your model of performance.
Yes, and most likely, although I haven't tried to generalize it and test the model against other contexts than strictly performance, then which is a bit easier to deal with here because it is quantifiable in the type of elite sport that where doping is at all being regulated. And again, my premise is safe doping in a healthy body as a legal construct, something that is legal to do, or not, where the World Anti-Doping Agency would come in and work and act their prohibition line. So it's within this political environment that I'm also developing a model. But unless we are going to have some kind of VADA for ultra-processed food, it could be hard to generalize it beyond sport because, again, it is not quantifiable, the performance, what I mentioned before, and where I struggle with answering.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we have a comparable cultural context where you can see the effect of the external substance, then you could probably I could draw some conclusions on the basis of the APS, and in medicine and surgery that have greatly now grown to an industry in our modern society, also where the premise is the same, where there are healthy individuals who wishes to use external substances. So any patient would be excluded from all my reasoning because the body is not autopoietic on the micro level. it needs help to function the way that one preferably would have it. And that's perfectly fine. That doesn't address has no relevance to the APS. But where we take beta-carotene, I was thinking, is one external substance just to make our skin look, more sun-tanned, then yeah, that could probably affect the ability of the body to reproduce. It could to reproduce any kind of skin-related performance. So if that is the case, immediately, if the body cannot reproduce because of the no, but that's true. Sorry, the body cannot. The performance would be the sun-tanned skin, right? So where we are tanned, that is the effect of beta-carotene. And the body cannot, after you've taken beta-carotene, it cannot reproduce that extent of being tanned by itself. So yeah, that is one example where the APS of skin would go.
I'll end my part of the opposition with a quite open question, because in relation to this article, dealing with issues of doping, you deal really with issues of what is fair competition. And in your understanding, how would you present what you take fair competition in sports to mean?
Right, that is a very big question in sports philosophy, but I'm happy to reflect a bit on it. So I would agree to what I take to be an agreed upon baseline of a competition where all factors that can impact the performance that the athlete, her or himself, do not control should be accounted for and balanced out, or there's a term I'm forgetting, should be accommodated for. But where we do differentiate between different types of advantages. Michael Phelps was an amazing swimmer also because of just the way he was born and how the proportionality of his bodies and the length of his hands, etc. And one wouldn't want to exclude him from swimming on the basis that is so idiosyncratic, because then he would have to have probably his own category with a couple of other people involved, perhaps. So therefore, we separate between category advantage and competition advantage. So a competition advantage being what we allow for, what we want to see in competition, but a category advantage being what we do not allow for in order to have fair or as equalized starting points on the starting line of a race or whether swimming or other in a fair competition. So what, in my view, right, then I find that this separation holds a lot of meaning. It seems to me to preserve competitions, because fair competition exists in relation as a concept to the meaning of sport at all. And there has arisen this substitutionary concept of meaningful competition, which I haven't looked far into, but it does substitute this type of wanting to remove advantages that we should have one's own category for, such as sex, for instance, or weight. And it could have been height, but there seems to be cultural reasons for why we do not categorize for height. My point is that in order to reply to your question on what I think constitutes fair competition, I would have to reflect upon and make up my mind on why do we have sports, what is the point of it, what is the point of a competition. That is, we enter then a subjective field of meaning, and I don't think it's meaningful to watch people who have nothing else in common but the kind of music they like. For instance, let's have a category for music preference. I don't see why, because that difference it does not relate to it. Has no effect on what you are testing. Had we tested the ability to make music work as a composer or to sing or to play the guitar, by all means, music preference could have been interesting. What kind of music do all those interested in jazz produce versus all those interested more so in soul and R&B? But here we are testing, and that is what sport has developed since the Greeks to do, where we want to see the full extent and capacity of the body. Yeah, and it's what kind of level of excellence we can get to physiologically. So then only the differences that would have any kind of impact on that variable is what I think we should consider to impact meaningfulness, meaning in sport. If so, then the variables we today have categories for, such as weight, age, and sex, are those that but also functionability, by all means, seems to me to be a decent way of dealing with fair competition. So I would say the sport today constitutes fair competition, except where we have substituted sex with gender identity, which would be akin to the musical preference, where you have a personal preference for a way to see yourself, but also a way to use words. That has nothing to do with what we are testing, which is the body in movement. So unless we are competing between what kind of identity is better than the other, I don't see why we should categorize for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Thank you to the first opponent and to the candidates so far. We will now have a short break before we continue the discussion with the second opponent. I ask you to be back here at 3 p.m.
Okay. Jeg har noe mat. Plutselig kjente jeg var så sulten på slutten.
Då ska den vara på grön. Då är det... Hur låter det nu? Låter det bra? Om jag... Lite längre ner. Är det bättre? Hörs det bra? Hörs jag? Så, låter det bättre? Nu tror jag det hörs. Det kan jag.
Welcome back. I now invite the second opponent, Katinka Everts, to start her discussion with the candidate.
Do you have excellent IT help up there?
Maybe I should put the sound a bit up. Is the sound better? Still low? Still low. Is it on? It is on.
Yeah. Just, if it's the same as mine.
Now.
Yeah.
Now. Right. Technical test. Sorry about that. Well, maybe I should begin by saying, as the first opponent did, just 2 words about who I am. Katinka Everts, professor of philosophy from Uppsala University in Sweden. My main line of research was, to begin with, philosophy of physics, but I moved towards philosophy of mind and consciousness, and that's what I've been working with the last years. And I've also had the great pleasure of teaching a course in philosophy of science and research ethics here at NIH for a large number of years now. And I've had you as a student in that course. So I'm now going to discuss with you the articles 3 and 4, which you have already presented, but I will briefly recapitulate also the evaluation from the committee. So the Article 3 is called Virtualizing the Moving Body Through Technosemiosis, a biosemiotic reframing of inclusive language in sport. And in that article, the argument is proposed that descriptive language modification is used as a tool for political purposes, deliberately disregarding prior meaning of words central to sport organization like sport and women. This is sometimes interpreted as them being inclusive and has the effect of virtualization, but is in fact exclusive in the sense that they may disconnect meaning from biological reality, thus undermining the meaning of, for example, women as natural entities. Now, the evaluation of the committee was that the article is interesting and well written, with clearly presented arguments and logically drawn conclusions that recommend a human bodily representation and a holistic ecological understanding of the moving body. I will also present the Article 4 at the same time because these 2 articles are so closely connected that they could have been written into one, except of course that it's very difficult to find journals that publish long articles. It's a problem we have in philosophy because we rarely want to condense ourselves too much, but they're extremely relevant to each other. Because the Article 4 is called Not All Words Are Concepts, Vicarious Semiotic Engineering, Exploiting Names, Grown Meaning in Trans Women Are Women. And this article strengthens conceptually and philosophically the arguments and conclusions presented in Article 3. The article suggests that symbols are names, not concepts, when we speak, for example, about the dichotomy women and man, and that the valuation of some words follow from their existential rather than functional role, that there are sign-specific requirements for change. Then applying a biosemiotics view on signification according to which amelioration is sign modification, biosemiotics is presented as a fruitful meta-semantic framework for conceptual engineering. And our evaluation generally was that, as in Article 3, the arguments are very clear, very logical, they are well presented, and the conclusions are compelling. I would also like to commend, and this is my personal comment, you for throughout using a very moderate and well-equilibrated language and style of reasoning, because the debate concerning, notably anything concerning women and trans women, is at times very heated. And so the use of such calm, logical, structured arguments is very positive.
Thank you.
Now, I will begin by a historic perspective, which I almost always do, whatever I speak about. And that concerns the development of definitions and how we understand certain important words. I will not begin by sport and woman. I will begin by human, because you have already discussed that a lot. Now, when you speak about politicization of philosophy, I think one needs to be aware, first of all, that philosophy and science throughout our history has almost always been politicized, in the sense that there is almost no value-neutral, totally non-ideological scientific development. Science and philosophy are permeated with values. And I will go back in time and take just one example, namely human. I was recently giving a keynote speak together with one other keynote speaker at the Academy of Science in Prague. We were talking about artificial consciousness. The other speaker was Anil Seth. And it so happens that both I and Anil would have been considered subhuman in the 18th century, driven by the science and philosophy at the time. For example, the philosopher Rousseau argued that women are not full-fledged humans. And this was taken up by Robespierre when he wrote the famous declaration of male rights, les droits de l'homme and les droits de citoyen. Feminists were hunted down and sent to the guillotine in those days. Even the very famous feminist and revolutionary Olympe de Gouges, who was personally hunted down by Robespierre and sent to the guillotine for having formulated les droits de la femme, the female rights and the rights of the female citizens. So, in time, our views on who was human and who was not developed. Anil would have been considered subhuman, not because he was a woman, he's not, it's a man, but because he's non-white. And since science and philosophy was almost totally dominated by white males who wanted to reserve key privileges for themselves, and that included being a full-fledged human, he would not either have been considered human. So, in time, this changed. Women became full humans, non-whites became to be considered humans, and we see this as a positive development, but it's partly political. Because when, for example, Darwin argued that women are inferior to men in every conceivable way, he did not have a shred of scientific evidence. So my point here being that I think that there is positive and negative politicization of science and philosophy. We must admit that we are in part driven by ideologies. And sometimes this is nefarious, sometimes this is not justified, but sometimes adapting language in view of new knowledge and new understanding can be justified. That is my suggestion. So my first question to you is what your take would be on that.
Thank you very much, both for the story and the question. Initially, I take issue with the framing that science has always been political on the basis of what is science. And if science is has method, our systematized reasoning towards a conclusion, has that always been politicized? My lack of knowledge in the history of ideas comes to play here. So I would have loved to do this study, actually, a biosemiotic study of the theory and reality of science. But what I suspect, or if I may speak from the place of idealized education, I guess. So the ideas I have with me from my education, which is where my idea of the reason for me being here comes from, and where my identity as an academician comes from. So it's an idea that's important to me. What is a scientist? What is science? In that initial understanding in me, which is where I have to depart from now, method can only be developed according to a pre-given set of purposes. The purpose here would be inquiry in and of itself, to do the inquiry and to do it in a way that can be called systematized at all, but for the sake of reaching a conclusion to the question, so not for the sake of something else. Creating a better society has never been, in my idealized understanding, the point of science as a method. It has been why we care about science, but that is an external factor to the research we are doing. So, and this idea itself is an internal factor. How I approach and apprehend the act of reasoning, the act of writing on a paper, how I apprehend that. Therefore, the idea within me of why I am doing what I'm doing and what I think is far more important than the ideas we may have of what would make knowledge building valuable. Because those ideas are much more potent in not polluting, but impacting negatively the internal factors here. If I mean, it's easy to find it compelling, this, the reason why we, for instance, have ameliorative analysis. Does it not sound like a wonderful thing to want to create a less marginalized community where you can, if you compare different groups in society, one to the other, and you see that here is a group that is marginalized by any standard. They do not have access to education that would likely make them the academicians that could do the research on their own community from a position of pre-knowledge where they understand much more so what they are studying. And so if we do not try to configure the organization, also the practical organization of doing research by those, through these external factors, quotas to make sure that we do not end up with the same group in universities, in our student masses, as those who are already researchers, to try to add color, if you will, to the picture, or the phenotype that is melanin in the skin to the mass. So I am not blind to these structural considerations, because but in that case still, it is because here is a lack of people, individuals that will go through a systematized reasoning process or data collection and then analysis in their own way. It is because we might have a new genius among us in a marginalized group. That is why we want to try to make sure to facilitate that everyone is included in the institution. It is not because we consider that the person has some kind of, or this is how I think about it, that person simply from having a different level of melanin, having a different ethnic composition, from having a different idea of what a self is and how it is constituted through language, wanting to call oneself by a different name. Now I am man, now I'm gender fluid, and now I am non-binary. It is not from that we consider their contribution, that we should at least assess their contribution to academia. It is for the work that they do along the same lines that work has been done throughout the ages. So it has to do with access to doing the work that should stay the same. If we have no continuity here, I believe we will, well, then we might as well just begin anew. Then suddenly science is something completely new, and that could be fine too, but I would think it would be sorely missed.
But yes, but what you are describing here is a case where it would not be justified to, by reference to a value, make a certain decision. So it's not by pointing out, for example, the very often very deep value-ladedness in a theory choice, historically, that everything becomes value-laden. And that's why I think it would benefit your argument to go into the details of when would it be correct to have a politicization and when not. For science is largely trying to influence the world. You've seen it in genetics, the choice of theories that emphasize innate characteristics that were adhered to by people who wanted to preserve the structures of power that were in place, or those that emphasize the influence of culture on the learning, and so the social mobility. It's very, very difficult to see exactly sometimes why have they chosen that theory and why that theory. So I think that there is a historical discussion here that is highly relevant to what you are driving at. But now I want to come more precisely to what you are talking about, and I would like to connect the discussion of trans women or women to the discussion of comparing different human rights. I have been working within the area of human rights for many years, and one thing that is quite obvious is that human rights are not always compatible. So whilst we may adhere to them all, and I do think that the UN Declaration of Human Rights is not a menu that you can just pick and choose from, it's something that you accept in its totality. That said, they are not necessarily compatible in practice. And the most classical example is the right to religious freedom compared to the woman's right to authority over her body, her sexuality, her mind. There are many cases in Sweden where, for example, Orthodox religious groups, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, do not want to send their daughters to school. And so when the Swedish state, the Swedish legislation says that this is not possible, you have to send the girls to school, they say this is not fair, we are being excluded, etc. So here, I would like to draw attention to numbers. Now, numbers are not in themselves ethically relevant, perhaps, but they are relevant when you're trying to assess the relative weight of the interests of the respective groups. So the Orthodox Jews in this case, because that was the most recent example, are infinitesimally small group. And so they were not considered big enough to outweigh the interests of all the female population of Sweden, which would have been the case if we changed the law. They could go to another country then and do it there. Now, if we compare, because I had to check the numbers when it comes to trans people and women, in Sweden, according to public statistics, there are 0.4% trans persons. So if we think that trans women then are approximately half of that population, we have 0.2%, whereas the number of female-bodied individuals in Sweden, women, as we still call them, are 49.7%. Now, you suggest, and to me this is, it's known, but it's profoundly counterintuitive, that in the name of inclusion, male bodies who self-identify as women are invited to participate in female sports. This, without even entering norms or morality or values, the argument for that cannot possibly be formulated in terms of inclusion for mathematical reasons and for logical reasons, because 0.2% of the population cannot possibly trump the interest of 49.7% of the population. And here, if we speak about fairness, it's not fair to exclude these people, Well, maybe not, but it's not fair to the other group to include them because it would create unfair competition. So I would be very interested in hearing how could this situation even occur, and what have been the arguments, if you have more arguments than you have presented in the book. How did this happen?
Well, it's a very good challenge to be given to take the position that is opposite to one's own. Thank you. First of all, just to be clear, from a sport philosophical perspective, where we have developed and have organized therefrom in practice around the concept of fair competition, it is simply not exclusion of trans-identified men, women-identified men, so males, which is how I use the word men and will continue to use it, except in a social setting perhaps we could negotiate, but then that is what it would be, a negotiation for other purposes than naming the world. So it is not an exclusion of men to say that you have to play with other men. It is an inclusion of women to separate into men's and women's categories. So no one has ever across the international sporting community excluded trans-identified men from sport. They have always been allowed to play sports. This is a common misconception that I think is perpetuated by the obfuscation of the body in language. Because when you say trans women are forbidden access to women's sport, that does sound like exclusion, doesn't it? But they already have their own category. So what they want is to change the entire system of categorization. And you ask me, how did we come to that point where this was at all allowed? And from my background in philosophical readings in sport ethics, I cannot see that we came to that point through argumentation, through the scholarly, solemn, calm, non-heated, or it can be heated as well, but still there is a systematized, thorough reasoning process behind most of what we do today in terms of categorization. This has not been the case, where men are now allowed to compete next shoulder to shoulder with women, whom you can see very clearly, they already outcompete in terms of physiological capacity from the starting line. So this is unfair. What has happened, for all I can see, is that one has had a belated debate, so arguments entering the scene of a scholarly discussion after the fact, a posteriori justification of men in women's sport. And this surely cannot be how we would like our sport organization to develop. But I am not replying completely to your question. You wanted me to ask why the proposal came about at all. And it shouldn't take much, I think, empathy and much use of one's ability to put oneself in another person's shoes, to see that a man who have developed this desire, this need, it seems to me to be a fundamental need. I'm no man and I have no interest in the concept of neither trans nor gender identity. I think it's an interesting theoretical framework and I would love to discuss it. But we theoreticians make up concepts all the time, and that is all they are. And if one makes an idea one's entire identity, then there are consequences to that. In free societies, we have to then discuss your identity, don't we? Because you have made your identity an idea here of gender identity. But for those who do, then it would make sense that they would want to see or to live as that which they see themselves, as female, as women. There is issues here with the language we are being presented with in that regard. So it's hard for me to know exactly how they see themselves. How does a man who says, I'm a woman, I identify as female, how does he actually see himself? What is the mental image? What am I being asked to accommodate for exactly? Because one uses both the term female and woman simultaneously, but insisting that here is nothing relating to sex. So if, for instance, the man would say, I have a female gender identity, but the word female has historically been used to denote the phenotype organized around the production of large gametes. So the female reproductive body, and male accordingly vice versa, the production of small gametes. So one would say, I have a female gender identity. It has nothing to do with sex. So suddenly gender identity becomes akin to the sexed body, that you can part into these two, well, originally reproductive strategies, these two types. But then you add other types as well. And then one says, on the back of that, therefore I'm a woman. I have a female gender identity, therefore I'm a woman. So this language obfuscation and simply confusion, there's a lot of confusion deriving from imprecise word use and conceptual development. Why can one consider gender identity to have anything to do with female and male? Why not just say, I have a gender identity as a man or as something else? So here one has allowed, and I'm not saying that there's an organized group of people who sit around a table and then they come to an agreement. By all means, when a new idea is absorbed in the public, one could expect there not to be harmony necessarily between all different propositions. From a theoretician's point of view, it is our job to try to disclose and reveal this disharmony. So from my position then as such, it doesn't make sense that a gender identity can be female and male. And I think this language obfuscation and the confusion it has led to is the reason why. I think that is the reason why we have men in women's sport, to the detriment of fair sport for all women. That is a human right already, to have access to fair to sport. And if sport then, up until now, and for men, is being made possible through fair competition and not other substitutionary concepts such as meaningful competition, which would take the individual's idea of meaning at the heart of, at the core of why we organize, how we organize the way that we do. Fair competition is more collectivistic, so it doesn't matter if I find it meaningful or not to categorize in this way or another. But yes, we have, for all I can see, there are by all means good reasons to want to get to live like the opposite either sex. Again, I don't know, it's hard for me because I lack information from an obfuscated language. But either to live as the opposite sex or as one's own idea of a self-understanding been what a trans woman as a concept meant, we wouldn't have been in this position had it really truly been so, what we're being presented with, that a female gender identity is completely decoupled from sex, that gender has nothing to do, well then we wouldn't have had all these demands being put upon an already organized sex-segregated society that we are now facing.
Yes, and in fact that's one reason why I find this whole situation slightly counterintuitive, to say the least. I've been working also in feminism for so many years, and feminism, the feminist groups have always been open to inclusion, defending other oppressed groups, not just women, but people from different ethnicities, people who face persecution because they are homosexuals, different social classes, and certainly also trans women and trans men who have a very difficult position in that they actually feel like something that does not correspond to their body, which is probably, especially when they are very young, I can imagine, very difficult. They should be respected, they should be helped, and certainly included in every possible way in the relevant areas. But how difficult is it to keep two thoughts in mind simultaneously? And here, there seems to be no winner, because the women obviously lose because they are no longer in a fair competition if male bodies enter their competition. For example, boxing. Interestingly, both your opponents are in martial arts. I trained full contact kickboxing for many years.
I did as well, not for many years, but yeah, same thing.
And there is a big difference fighting a man and fighting a woman. But So obviously, the female bodies lose out because they don't have access to fair competition. But the male bodies, what's the value of a medal won in an unfair competition? It's a useless medal. The sport loses because the sport becomes, at least from my naive, perhaps, perspective, pointless, because an unfair sport is a bit if I was going in a boxing match against a 6-year-old. There's no point to that, and my medal would be useless to me. So the question I would like then to be addressed, and maybe you can't answer it now, but I would recommend that you raise it. Who wins from this? Because there is always, if you read a crime story and you want to solve a crime, you look for the winner of what has happened. I have no answer, and it's not really a question, but it seems to me that that is something that you might want to look into a bit more carefully, because I don't see that the trans persons are winning anything here.
No, but I think that those who advocate for gender identity-based categorization of sport would say that our time aspect is too short, because we're not taking to heart what society will come out of a slightly uncomfortable reform of what we're doing. Out of that will not a society that does value the different abilities within a group based on gender identity come forth. Performativity is a concept that I'm looking forward to go more into, but I still think that it should have been disseminated more clearly in the public debate, if it is so that it lies at the heart of exactly this assessment of meaning. Performativity, as I take it, would be butlers, or at least in the wielding within the context of sex and gender, would be where you state something, or you execute an act that creates what it is that you say that you are, or embodies what it is that you claim to be through the act. Performative speech acts, performative acts in general. This is where, when a priest says, "I hereby declare you husband and husband," or wife and wife, etc., then you will be husband and wife, etc. I now, for instance, deliberately chose to use homosexuals in a formal partnership, it's called marriage, instead of heterosexuals, because I believe that by pretending that that is the most normal, I'm creating the norm that I wish to see. So I think I'm acting upon performativity to some degree. Am I not? At least I think there is something intuitive in that concept. It's interesting and original. I just wish it would have been made available to the general public, because I, as you, have found myself pretty befuddled or confused as to how we could have gotten to this place. Norway now have, beyond sport, we have 3 self-identification laws that I would say where you are granted rights and goods, etc., based on your identification. So based on saying, I have this or that gender identity. This law, could it not be considered as a sort of judicial branch to performativity? Because you're saying that in the eyes of the law, yes, you are something by way of saying that you are that. I am a woman, and therefore, now you are a woman in the eyes of the law. Very few theoreticians have had what must be a dream that Butler is living right now, which is where you get to see your concepts really take root to the point of, on national level, of developing and changing, uprooting whole legislations. I do not have women's rights anymore in Norway. I do not. I have women's coincidence, which it's coincidentally so, that I do not live in a community where any man finds it necessary, he would say, for him to say, oh, I'm a woman too. It's simply by happenstance that I have access to all my women's spaces when I go for a swim in a public bath, swimming hall, and there's no man in the locker room. Every man here has access to do that in a self-identification kind of rule. So right now that's the case. Performativity, though, does, I think, add a prolonged temporal aspect to the discussion. So where you and I and others may be confused and slightly shocked, how did we get here? We have had cases in Norway already where men have entered locker rooms in public swimming halls, and then the woman has been prosecuted by the man for having made a fuss about it. She doesn't want to see that penis in her locker room, and I find that very understandable, a demand. But at that point, we may ask ourselves, how do we get there, and who is the winner? The future trans-identified people, the future people who have taken it so to heart, which they apparently have this idea of gender identity, of making your own life through speech alone, and to have a society that adapts to that self-idea, self-image. Those are the ones who are winning, I would say.
It's very interesting to connect that question, since we are almost always discussing trans women and women's situation rather than trans men and men's situation.
That's true.
And it's primarily women who are being threatened. It's interesting to lift that discussion and see other trends in society, not only in the extreme case of America during Trump, where one tries to delete all reference to women in research, all reference to female capacities. One orders Pentagon to take away the portraits of women from the corridors. So there is a trend in the world of wanting to delete women, delete reference to women again. In Swedish radio, there was a program referring to a horrendous attack by the Taliban on a girls' school. Not once did they mention the word girl. They only mentioned the word child or person. And then a discussion followed, and they said, yeah, but it's not politically correct to use the term woman. It's not. But then they obscured the fact that the reason why the school was attacked was that it was girls in the school. So then the reason for the attack was obscured by Swedish journalists. And both, for example, in Argentina now, which is a very misogynistic government, and of course, as I said, in the state, femicides are now not any longer allowed to be referred to. So it's just a killing, but it's never a killing because the body is a woman. Now, I'm doing an excursion here, but I'm coming now to my point. There is a trend universally of rendering women more invisible that can potentially become extraordinarily dangerous. And I don't think that, I can't say I think anything about this. I do not think that one needs to blame the trans discussion for this. But maybe the trans discussion has been hijacked to serve that purpose. For example, when the Swedish revised law on abortion deleted the word woman, even though, for the moment at least, only women can bear children. So only women could be relevant for abortion. And now for my concrete question. The reason why this is never mentioned in terms of deleting men from healthcare, could you connect that to the relative absence of debates surrounding trans men? Because trans men have not suggested that the term man should not be used in healthcare. For example, in the care of prostate cancer. They still use man, whereas it was suggested that in maternal care, even in maternal care, the word woman should be deleted. Do you have any knowledge about that? About the difference here between the trans men and men?
Well, first of all, I believe that the reason why we speak more about trans women, and we hear the slogan, more trans women are women, repeated, and not trans men are men, at least I have actually not heard it being said, I've not seen it anywhere. I think that has to do with an interplay between the existing and what is being proposed as the ideal new. The interplay being that the reason why we have sex segregation at all is not for the sake of men, it is for the sake of women. We have men's locker room for the protection of women. So already there's an imbalance to begin with, which is why we organize the way that we do. I think that is what we're seeing play out now in the debate, where one proposes to remove sex segregation. Then, of course, you will mobilize those who, for whom the sex segregation has been made for in the first place. But back to trans men. I do appreciate the opportunity to go more into what you commented as a committee is lacking, or there's a little bit, I could have expanded on the political analysis of the context of my work, so I appreciate that opportunity. In this case then, since you ask how I view it, it seems to me that it is the word itself that is valuable. The sign here in the case of man, woman, has been exalted to a quite high status. I wish I had more, I had time to research and also had competency in a political analysis of the psychology. There's a whole field called political psychology used to understand people's ideas and behavior in war normally. I think that would be relevant here. But also within groupthink, I think the psychology of cults would be necessary in order to understand this exalted standing of a sign. Because, I don't know about you, but prior to the whole trans issue debate, my own relation to the word woman, that I would consider myself the object of, was kind of, well, I didn't exalt it exactly. I didn't thrive in it. I didn't feel any sense of euphoria because people called me a woman. So that was not the value of it. It's a name for the body that I am that preserves the continuity of political, practical work that you refer to internationally and here, and preserves the cultural meaning making around the female body I am without dehumanizing me, which I think would be the case, by referring to that body as simply female. Because insects are also female. I'm a woman, I'm a human. But beyond, so that's the first point I would like to make, which is we would probably need to look to the exalted status of the word itself, and perhaps from there we could see a difference, a gender. I think gender plays a role here. By gender I mean sex. I can't say gender as a synonym anymore. But that sex plays a difference, perhaps in that regard. Women who call themselves men, so trans men, have not asked for anyone to remove the word man. That was the premise, the observation that was being made. But men would like us not to use the word woman. I'm not sure if that is my experience though, because I've seen men being very ecstatic about being invited into a type of medical treatment, such as cervical screening for cervical cancer. They like just to be treated as if they had a cervix. They do not. They are men. But I think there is more to be said about that link between the word woman and the sex that it refers to. If we act upon the word woman as if it is a name for the sex, then it does seem to me that men are perfectly, they find some kind of value in that being in, But I did lose my thread a little bit there. It's an interesting but difficult question, since I haven't looked more into it. I agree to the observation that there is a difference here in the kinds of demands that is being put down. But also, the sex could play a part in that as well. Women are not known to put our demands as high as a group of men are. So if you want to blame it on testosterone, I don't know. I think there is a nature-culture play there, nature-nurture at play, which is the reason why it's important to keep names throughout one's life. It's not, you can't just change your testosterone level or do a medical surgery and then suddenly that entire life of being treated as one or the other sex disappears from one's network of behavioral structures, value sets. What can I do? What can I demand and not? So this is a multivariable type of scene.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think it is important to draw such comparisons and to try and analyze clearly what are the social motivations driving this development. It is very difficult to do it, and because you don't want to stigmatize people, you don't want to attack anyone, and certainly it is, as I said before, it is unfortunately one of many debates who have sometimes been carried on in a rather unfortunate atmosphere of aggression, which is useless to any intelligent discussion. So it's not easy to get involved in it, but I think it's necessary. One reason being that we risk being stuck with words denoting something which is not really there, as you discuss in your articles. Similarly to what has happened in artificial intelligence, and you draw the comparison in your Article 3 between the linguistic developments in sport and linguistic development in artificial intelligence, where suddenly we have a lot of mental terms. Already intelligence is arguably not applicable to artificial systems, and even less so awareness, intentionality, decision-making, feelings. And yet, and this is the area I'm working on right now, artificial consciousness, they are being used persistently. And now that when philosophers such as I, myself, and my colleagues, we say, well, stop doing this. This is simply erroneous. They say, yeah, but now it's a fait accompli. Yeah. Now we can't change it. For example, artificial systems hallucinating. I say, we've all heard that term when we read the news. Yeah, they hallucinate. No, they don't hallucinate. They commit errors. And they don't commit errors. It's an activity that is erroneous. They do not behave. Mm-hmm. I don't collaborate with my car. I don't collaborate with my computer either. And what happens is that this permits then the description. It opens the door to more and more people believing that this reality is actually there. Yeah. And now people are starting to believe more and more that this reality is there. They have therapeutic settings with their chat GPT, who can sometimes give very intelligent responses and sometimes completely absurd responses. This is a slippery slope. And it's very, very difficult to change once it is there. And in the end, people may really believe that what is there, what is not there, is there. And that can have negative social consequences.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes. Now that goes at the heart of the frame for my third paper, which is, as you referenced, Thomas Fuchs' warning that you also put forward here, that we set the precedence for seeing humans in something that is non-human. And it is interesting, you mentioned earlier that we don't do that with animals, but we do it with human makings. Right. So I agree that this could be a very slippery slope, but we've already gotten very far in that direction, haven't we? Thinking AI and feeling robots. So it's hard to root up as something, a tendency, a habit that has taken place, but I don't think it's something that comes out of nowhere. There must, perhaps, if we look to the basis for why we tend to make these choices terminologically, where we go for whatever this anthropomorphism in language, how we describe the human-made technology, and what we choose not to describe actual sentient conscious life akin to ours from a biological basis, we don't grant them the same anthropomorphic, well, you could say decency. Not to say that they're humans, but that they are also thinking and feeling and reasoning. So what would be the basis for that tendency we are seeing and experiencing? I don't know, I'm not going to give myself questions.
No, my point was more like that we have this tendency of getting used to words. And what is also a fact is that we get used to words that do not correspond to reality. And even if we don't understand it, such as, for example, even in science, nobody really understands the mathematics of string theory. But the understanding is in a way a sort of resignation. You get used to this impossible mathematics. Sometimes it's good, like in the case of string theory, but sometimes it can be very risky. So we are not there yet when it comes to the concept of a woman. And I think that my recommendation to you then was to draw historical comparisons, draw more social analysis of different functions in society, also draw the comparison to trans men, and then highlight what the situation is, because it could possibly be that also in the name of the interests of trans persons, whose interests must certainly be protected in all this, in a way that is reasonable for everyone, maybe there is a normative recommendation to be made on the basis of your excellent research, and your framework of biosemiotics can be helpful there. So
that is the level of the research I didn't get to, and I wholeheartedly agree, and I'm grateful for you encouraging me to do that. The normative element, the dimension that is sort of just seething at the very tip, which is the last page of my thesis. What should we do then if this is the case, if virtualization is one of the effects? Semioethics, again, I mentioned it before, I think is fruitful as a departure point to look at, but I would argue from a perspective where we look to the value of words themselves, seeing them as semioecology. I am leaning towards a possible inherent valuation of certain types of words, so not all, but after a period, if we can show to a grown meaning, and that can be measured and studied. If you operationalize grown meaning as a type of collective interpretant, so any kind of indicator that we are collectively thinking about the same thing in the same way. So this is what a thinking something is. This is what reasoning is, or this is what a woman and a man is. Then, if we are able to sort of get in there before there's an obfuscation process, a virtualization, substitutionary type of language process happening, we could set the record straight. Then we could perhaps it would be possible to register like this has been this is a grown word. It's unique for its cultural values that it upholds from that relation if it's allowed to be left in peace. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we would then go on state level towards some kind of word police. That doesn't sound like a good idea to me. But at all to have a normative discussion and reflection among ourselves to enlighten ourselves to the possible detriment and harm we're actually causing, all the while thinking we are very kind people, thinking that this is kindness in effect, and then this is solidarity with marginalized group. What marginalized group? Maybe minority is not the only basis for marginalization. The female sex has its needs for a reason, politically speaking, because it is of a different physiological capacity than the male. And we've already come to that, or agreed on that before. So at all to discuss on the ethical implications, I would love to see my work being taken in that direction. But language, yes, it is hugely important. So we do actually have a kind of common basis, it looks like, for me. The different camps here, at least in the trans issue debate, those who advocate for the construction and deconstruction of words. Look, we have arbitrarily made them at one point. Can't we just make them anew? Let's take this sound then, human, and we'll use it on an AI robot. Because it appears to me, subjectively, to be a human. Why can't I say that this is a transhuman then? Which is the first step. And then the next step is, well, but why can't transhumans be humans too? And then suddenly you ended up at the point of the as-if that Fuchs warns us about, which is where we started out with saying, it is as if this robot is a human. Look, it joins me for meals, and I can have very interesting conversations with it. And it is my therapist, and maybe my lover, my partner, in a very intimate personal sphere. So it is as if it's a human. Yes, as if, we say. But for as long as we accept collectively then the white lie, which would be kindness in lying, so the very good intention, and we say, yes, your transhuman partner is your human partner, of course, because that would affirm the idea, the virtual idea of this being the case, of this robotic mechanic human. But it seems to me that this metaphorical use, then, it is as if of a grown word, a word that has been allowed to gain meaning from the uninterrupted relation between saying human and pointing to the Homo sapiens body. At that point, if we keep repeating a white lie on an objectively real basis for filling a word with meaning, we're making it practically impossible to orient ourselves in the world, I would think. Of course, we will end up with what Fox warns us about, the as-is of the as-if. Now, it is actually so that transhumans are humans. And that is not, if I can help us as a society to not get to that point, at least without as conscious and aware an attitude towards it as possible, then that's what I would love to do.
Well, excellent. Then I thank you very much for this dialogue.
I thank you so much as well. Thank you, Dr. Eres.
Thanks are due both to the candidate and to the examination committee. The examination committee will now leave the room to evaluate the dissertation and make their final decision. I ask for the rest of you to stay in this room, and I will announce the committee's decision within 5 to 15 minutes. Okay. The examination committee has found Margrethe Voll Storaas' dissertation of October 17th satisfactory. The committee's conclusion is unanimous. On behalf of the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences, I hereby award Margrethe Voll Storaas the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Sports Science. Congratulations. You will receive your diploma at the ceremony in August at the start of the next academic year. I will now ask the committee, the head of department, and the new doctor to join me in a procession out of the auditorium. I hereby declare the disputation for completed.